Hello tanks and tankettes, welcome to Supporter Spotlight number 18, and the theme of today's video is going to be Rassha, or maybe I should say Soviet Union if I'm going to be, you know, exact and correct about it. We're kicking off with this game from Armor, or Jim as I'll probably refer to him at various points in the video because, you know, I know him as Jim. He actually runs the PC War Machine website, and it's actually part of a wider network that he runs as well. So, as I point out whenever I put up one of Jim's replays, if you've got any interest in scale modelling at all, you know, building models of tanks and planes and even ships, his website is really cool for all that kind of thing. It's a fairly big community. There's all kinds of reviews and whatnot, and videos and pictorials of people putting stuff together, and I don't know, it's cool. Sometimes I go and just look at the models because there's a lot of very talented people posting photos and videos on his other sites. Anyway, he has unfortunately lost his platoon mate in the ISU, which is very careless of you, Jim, very careless. It was a very Russian platoon when you think about it, an ISU and an IS-3, but yeah, despite that, they do still have a fair amount of Russia on their team because there's a whole bunch of IS-3s, an IS-6, KV-5, T-54 Mod 1, and they also have a box tank. The enemy team has got a couple of IS-3s as well, but it's a lot more mixed. However, if you think that's going to give Jim's team some kind of massive superiority, well, you'd be surprised. And I will actually take this moment to note that in the next patch of warships that's coming up, and I know a lot of you don't follow that at all, but basically there are going to be some matchmaking changes which would be nice in World of Tanks maybe. What they're going to do is they're going to endeavour to match up nations. Now at the moment they do a thing with carriers specifically where they have an equal number of same tier carriers on the team. It's very strict in that way. What the matchmaking is going to try and do from the next patch is match up nationalities, so that you don't get one team that has all the Japanese destroyers and one team that has all the Russian destroyers, for instance. So that should help balance a bit, and I picked out destroyers particularly because I think it's destroyers that have been the cause of this in particular, because the stealthiness, and especially at the higher tiers, like you get somebody in, say one team gets all the Shimikazes and your team's got all the, is it the Tashkent that's the tier 10? I can't remember. No, that's the tier 8, isn't it? What's the tier 10? Nope, whatever the tier 10 is, it's gone. But yeah, it can make a big difference. You can just end up with walls of torpedoes that your destroyers can't do anything to counteract because they just get consistently outspotted and shot up by the enemy team. So it might be nice to see something like that in World of Tanks, especially as regards high tier mediums, because sometimes that can make a difference. Anyway, having said, you know, lots of Russia on this team, lots of Soviet, it really hasn't mattered. The support around Jim, I mean, he pushed up into this middle area, and when he did, it looked like he had lots of support. But that's all just evaporated, and now he's alone against multiple enemies, and this is where the Stalinium really comes in handy. Now, a lot of these shots are people not fully aiming, or they're not aiming terribly well, but even so, some of them are slightly silly. And that one just went in his tracks. Now he has taken his first damage from the Lerva finally, and it's actually not that hard to damage an IS-3, but the nature of the armour is such that you can get a lot of quite lucky bounces. Now he could have killed the Lerva there, but that was a low roll. The T-34 is probably the biggest threat right now because it could one-shot him, but fortunately for him, his other allies, his remaining allies, have come to the rescue. While all these tanks were trying to kill Jim, they were able to come up round behind him and you know, rescue him basically, take advantage of that. So he takes out the VKD, I think with an ASRAM there actually. The WZ, well, he's on his premium as well, and the VKD I can't blame for firing Prem, and I can't blame the WZ either because it's an IS-3. It's not the easiest thing to pen in the world if you've got a low amount of pen, but they're now down and that's fine, and that just leaves the E25. Now, I don't know why the IS-6 is backing off here. And that's probably the luckiest bounce in the entire game, right there. But yeah, the IS-6 could have just gone in. It's an E25, and instead the IS-6 is going, I don't know where. He's trying to flank an E25? Who knows? Anyway, E25 puts his shot into, like, a pillar or something. The IS-6 does actually flank the E25. Yeah, I don't know. Why not just drive forward and shoot him in the face? Who knows? So that now just leaves this enemy IS-3 and a Jackson who hasn't been spotted at all the entire game. So he's got to be on the field maybe, or all the way back at the enemy cap circle. Who knows? So the mod 1, rather than waiting for backup, just goes in, and that's going to take a bit of his health away. But it's quite a low roll, 330 from that enemy IS-3. So although he would have survived the hit regardless, he's got a little bit more health than he might have otherwise. But anyway, it's just, you know, can Jim turn up and get the kill? And no. And that actually means that the 54 mod 1 kills the... or rather, the 54 mod 1 gets killed. I know what I mean. So here's Jim on 34 health. And he's only... I mean, he lost a lot of health. He lost most of his health. But the amount of bounces he had, he could have died multiple times over there. So he's quite lucky to be alive. But there's still that one enemy left. And the Jackson, with an HE shell, could probably kill him. However, they've won this. The IS-6 has got so much health left that there's no way they're going to lose. And there's the Jackson, who was just sat all the way back there. But honestly, with this matchmaking, can you blame the fella? This is terrible matchmaking for a tier 6. And... although you get things like, I mean, the Hellcat's got the same 90mm gun basically, but that's got much better mobility, and that can almost be medium tank-ish, not nearly as much as it used to be, but something like the Jackson really doesn't have the chance to do that. So yeah, can't blame the guy for being all the way at the back in a tier 8 game like this. This is very bad matchmaking for tier 6s indeed. So there we go. That was an ace tanker. He got what is that? High caliber? No, yes, high caliber, steel wall, Confederate, Spartan, and whatever that other one is, I can't remember off the top of my head. Anyway, never mind, doesn't matter. Nearly 5,000 damage done. So he wasn't just sitting there having absurd amounts of damage pinged off his face. He was actually doing damage at the same time, and he was by far the top of the team. But the T-54 first prototype actually did pretty well as well. But that's good matchmaking for that thing. So yeah, even though he lost a lot of his health and fired quite a few shells, he still walked away with a fairly decent profit out of that, and a very good score. So yes, there was a little sprinkling of Rassha in there, but even so, even if your tank gives you these opportunities, you still have to take those opportunities, you still have to grasp them, and I think Jim did fairly well there in that one. Next up, we have Redman 36 in the Su-85B. And if you're thinking this is a familiar scenario, we actually had him in the last video but won in the Su-85B. He does play other tanks, I swear. But last time it was from my point of view, because it was a game where I was playing with him and he had taken this even though I was in Tier 5 Churchill 3. But that had limited matchmaking, so the worst I could see was Tier 6, the worst he can see was Tier 6. And this is one of his favourite low tier tanks. It's a very capable little machine. In fact, when it's top tier, you might even argue that it's overpowered with this gun. But when you can see Tier 5s and 6s, not so much. And that's the nature of low tier World of Tanks matchmaking. If it's something that scales up to that +2 tier matchmaking, especially at the low tiers, it means that when it's top tier, it's really quite powerful. And there's actually a couple of examples on the enemy team. There's a Marder 38T, and they also have a Matilda, and they're both exactly the same. When they're top tier, they can be very powerful machines indeed. So that's not so much the fault of the machines as it is a fault of World of Tanks matchmaking generally. The +2 is not good for a lot of tanks. You get an awful lot of Tier 4s that just can't cope with even Tier 5s. I will also point out that, like Jim, I don't think I actually said this, Jim was on the NA server, Redman is as well. Low tier matchmaking, especially Tier 3 and Tier 4 on NA, even on NA East, which is by far the most populous server, it's horrible. When I was grinding through to the KV5, I had, I can't even remember, I figured out the percentage, but at Tier 4 in the T28, it was by far the majority of the time I was in Tier 5 battles. Some Tier 6s, where matchmaking could, it put me into a Tier 5 rather than a Tier 6, I guess, but Tier 4 battles, top tier, just hardly ever happened. Out of like 25 battles, I think I was top tier 4 times. And I'm not exaggerating, it was that bad. So when you have a favourite Tier 4, you know, it's going to be one of the more capable ones, and it is this. And he's actually made it a bit more capable by putting on the food consumable. But hey, when you can see a lot of tier 5s and a lot of tier 6s, and when you're going to see a lot of tier 5s and 6s, and you know for a fact, given the server you're playing on, then I don't know. I don't know if it really counts as seal clubbing at that point. I really don't. However, I mean, he's well past the SU-85B. He just keeps playing this because it's a fun machine to play. Although, you know, playing World of Tanks for fun, I mean, there's something a bit wrong with you, Redman 36. If you're playing World of Tanks for fun, that's a bit deviant if you ask me. Anyway, he's basically been sat in this position and using his teammate's spotting to put this good gun to use. And there we go, takes down a tier 5 heavy tank. But he had the side of a tier 5 heavy tank. There's not that many tier 5s that would have resisted this gun from the side, and certainly not a T1 heavy. The T1 heavy and the M6 do not have good side armor at all. Talking of spotting from his teammates, though, I mean, he's only done a little bit of damage so far, but a lot of his teams managed to die, but unfortunately a lot of the enemy teams managed to die as well. And look at that, 6 health. A 6 health ammo rack on a tier 3 tank. I mean, that's like the least necessary ammo rack I've ever seen. At least for the last, I don't even know how many 100 replays it'll have been. But anyway, so his team made a push round and kind of ran into a bunch of enemies near the enemy cap and got obliterated. And his team have managed to basically do the same to the enemies that tried to push around the south to their cap. And so now we're in this position. So that's a Valentine AT, that is the tier 3, but it's got a pretty good gun for a tier 3. However, no armour, and for this gun that was an easy 2-shot kill. Hell, he probably could have loaded HE and put it into the gun shield for that, because the Valentine AT is not particularly good. The gun's okay, I think it's a 6-pounder that it can mount, so it's like 110 pen and 75 damage, fairly fast firing, but it's on a Valentine chassis and it has no armour. It's like 20 armor, something like that. It's terrible. It really is bad. I should actually also point out, talking of low tier Russian possible seal clubbers, the SU-76I. Yes, you don't see a lot of those. Not to be confused with the SU-85I, and I think there was actually one of those on one of these teams as well. But the SU-76I was one that got released before they had properly balanced it, and Wargaming very hastily pulled it from sale. So on EU it was only on sale for a matter of hours. I think NA had it for about a day, Russia had it for something like 2 or 3 days, so it was very, very, very briefly on sale in some of these places, and especially on EU if you have one. Yeah, there's maybe like a couple of thousand at most, it might even be in the hundreds, I don't know. So it's a rare sight, and it's a slightly less rare sight on NA, but still a rare sight. So we've skipped on almost exactly 2 minutes, because there wasn't a lot that happened in those 2 minutes. Redman went to have a little peek around, see if he could spot. Stuart's also done some spotting, so they figured out that the enemies haven't really moved far from their base at all, it seems like. The enemy SU-85I was actually last spotted in F1, which is a position you usually only see tanks using for the likes of team battles or 742s. Of course, he's probably not there anymore. The Churchill is lit up by the Stuart right now, and the Panzer Kampfwagen T25, which is the German one rather than the Czech one, well, the Panzer Kampfwagen kind of gives it away. That hasn't been spotted for a little while either, and that thing is, well, it's pretty mobile, but the turret traverse isn't so good. And that's one of the... I mean, it's got a nice gun, it's got a good straight line speed, I think the rest of it's all pretty decent for a tier 5 medium. It's just the turret traverse is pretty terrible, unfortunately, but otherwise it's actually one of the better tier 5 premium mediums. And it's quite nice now that the Germans, it's not just the Soviet heavies, you can actually get a really good German medium crew going if you've got all the premiums. So the T25 actually pops up in the north, he gets spotted by the Stuart. KV-1 is up there as well. Redman is cautiously moving up. He has taken 1 hit already, and he can't really afford to take many. He's only got 260 health, but he can help this Stuart out, and the Stuart's actually going for this guy. Now he tracks the T25, which is excellent for this Stuart, and I mentioned that turret traverse where you can see it in action, but... whoopsie! Yeah, I don't think he meant to do that. That was incredibly bad timing. Maybe Redman could have held his fire just a little bit longer, and made sure that he absolutely wasn't going to hit the Stuart, because you could see the T-25's turret going round. You could tell that the Stuart was going for the circle strafe, and he does apologise in the chat for doing that to the Stuart, but that's really unfortunate. That is, yeah, that's their eyes gone, basically, because the Stuart, in this kind of matchmaking, is a pretty nice little scout tank, especially the Chinese Stuart, but the American Stuart's still not bad. Anyway, the Churchill gets lit up, and this is just pow, pow, pow. Side of the turret. Turret armor on the Churchill's not particularly great. More than enough for this gun, so he's down. The Su-85 not been spotted yet, but the T-25 is probably the main threat now, gun-wise, because the Su-85I, it's okay, but it's not particularly great. It's a little lacking in the gun department. Hell, this is probably a better machine than the Su-85I, although I think that got limited matchmaking, which of course is just not a feature these days. So there we go, there's the Su-85I. Hopefully the KV-1 and the Su-76I can handle it, but you never know. Redman's going to see if he can get some shots anyway. And actually, you can see how big the commander's cupola is on that thing, that he can just, like, just the top of the tank is showing, and then the commander's cupola. And there we go, he actually lands a hit. So the Su-76I is dead, but the KV-1 then takes out the Su-85I. Unfortunately, the KV-1 gets taken out at the same time, so there was a bit of mutual annihilation there. But the T-25, in trying to come back down, gets himself spotted by Redman, and there we go, final kill. So that was 1900 damage and an ace mastery. So even though it was a tier 5 game, he was able to do quite a lot in that one, but he couldn't have done it without his teammates. And that's the thing, even with these machines that do scale up to higher tiers decently, and they're a minority in this game, they really are at the lower tiers, you still need your teammates to be doing enough, and in this case his teammates were doing enough, and there was actually a fair few medals on each team in this one, but Redman's ace had to be, I mean he's probably had many aces in this, but it had to be quite nice. So yeah, by far the top damage. I mean the KV-1 did alright, but apart from that team kill, I don't really see what else he could have done better there. That was a pretty nice textbook low tier tank destroyer game. Just sit back, use your very good gun if you've got one. If you're not like what's the terrible French one? I can't remember. The South 40. There we go. If you're not something like that, then yeah, that's what you do basically. Lastly, we have this game from Island Man in the Su-101. Yeah, I bet you were expecting an ISU or a T-54 or something like that, but no. This is the line that Rassha forgot, because these things are generally not particularly well regarded. They are very awkward tank destroyers indeed. Now, most people playing the previous tank, the Su-85B, go up to the Su-85, and then they take the Su-100, and they go up to the Object 268, and, you know, they've got big guns to play with, and reasonable mobility, and, you know, a bit of gun depression, but not a huge amount, a bit of frontal armor, but not a huge amount. Well, these, on the other hand, have DPM that, I mean, you get up to tier 9 and 10 and we're talking tortoise levels of DPM. It's pretty ridiculous. Some of the best DPM of a tank destroyer in the game. But generally they also have rear-mounted casemates, so they have awful gun depression, and that coupled with the lackluster guns, at least up through tier 8, well I guess you would say tier 8 really, because compared to their peers they really lag behind in terms of penetration and damage. The fact that they have high DPM and reasonable mobility and even a little bit of armor to work with, a lot of people just see the penetration and the gun depression or lack thereof and they go nope. So you don't see a lot of them around, and you don't see a lot of the tier 10s around, the Object 263, which have really good frontal armor. Except if somebody then decides to just load up the premium shells and spam through it, as with any well-armoured tank. But this is Island Man in one, and we're going to get to see some of that DPM in action. We're going to get to see one of the few really good things about this line. Now this is an unusual position. There's no artillery for him to worry about, but there's not a great scope for shooting stuff here, so it's a little bit risky. Normally you get medium tanks coming up into the middle, but he's actually decided, I mean he's got medium mobility basically, he's actually decided to push up, and he was going to try and take out the M103, but fortunately his allies nuked the guy for him, so that's fine. He's now got this middle position. But that gun depression is going to be an issue, oh boy, you bet it is. So the situation is, the enemy team has basically not bothered with the 1-2 line at all, pretty much. That, however, means that they're all probably on the 8-9 line. So we've got a bit of a... What would you call this scenario? I kind of want to call it the yin-yang scenario, because you've got most of one team going along one flank, and you've got most of the other team going along the other flank, and you see where I'm going with this, right? However, from the middle area, there is this perch here, and he's got at least enough gun depression for this. I mean, these guys are far enough away. I'll also say he appears to be using one of the 100mm guns. Now, this thing gets 2 100mm and 2 122mm to choose from. And I guess he's got the 100mm in this particular game, and I think this was 9.10, something like that. Because it's got some better stats to it in terms of its handling, basically, even if it obviously does less damage per shot. The 122, I've never played any of these machines, so I don't know how it compares in terms of its DPM and accuracy exactly. Maybe I should have looked that up. But for our purposes, all we need to know is this is one of the 100mm he's using. I'm going to guess it's not the stock 100mm with the 175 pen. The top 100mm, and I think the 122 is sort of similar-ish. I mean, it's 220 average AP penetration. So you see what I mean about it lagging rather behind a lot of the other Tier 8 tank destroyers. A lot of the Tier 8 tank destroyers are already up to 230, 240, 250 pen already. Whereas this, not so much. And that's actually one of the issues I had with the Canonian Jagdpanzer. It's got really bad penetration for a Tier 8 tank destroyer, and this is really a whole line of tank destroyers like that with very lackluster penetration for their tiers. And considering that it is the brother of the ISU 152 with that ludicrous, monstrous BL-10 gun, well, it kind of pales in comparison to the BL-10, absolutely. So he's doing his best to defend the cap right now. There's a couple of allies shooting from the perch at H3. He has, however, got an unwelcome guest, an unwelcome visitor. The AMX-30's just driving around here, and that's a slight issue. So he's actually turning to... I mean, he's driven down that way for now, but he's paying attention to this. He's not just ignoring the possibility of getting an AMX-30 up the butt, because that would be unpleasant. So his team, meanwhile, I mean, they're doing some good work here defending. There's a couple that pressed onto the enemy cap, and because they control the 1-2 line, the enemy can't defend from that position. They're having to come back up the 8-9 line to defend. So although the numbers are even-ish, I mean, his team are ahead by 3 tanks. They actually do have the advantage at this stage, just due to the nature of the map and the fact that so many of their team went down the 8-9 line, where it's quite comparatively easy. I mean, you've seen exactly how well they defended against quite a lot of enemy tanks there. It didn't take that many tanks to hold that back. So he goes to have a look, and oh, lo and behold, there's the AMX-30, who surely would have known he was here. They were in proximity range of each other, and that's how he actually spotted the AMX-30 was there the first time. So the AMX-30's just gone, oh, I'm being shot. But here's that DPM in action. He's already taken half this guy's health. Now he's backing off. He's actually down to 3 shells now, 3 AP shells. The AMX-30 seems to donk that shot, and I guess he just... I don't know, sheer bad luck, but Island Man would have survived anyway. But he dies, so Island Man actually got over 1,200 health out of that guy. That was quite nice. The DPM on this against squashy targets, it's like any high DPM low pen machine, like I don't know, some of the British tank destroyers, I guess. I'm thinking of some of the mid-tiered ones where it just, you might not have the best, and there we go, he can't quite get his gun down far enough. You might not have the best penetration, but if you can get those targets that you can hurt, you can really hurt them. You really can. So somebody else gets the final kill just as the cap counter fills up, so that was quite pleasing. They managed to actually kill everybody before a couple of their team capped, and as you can see, another ace. Yes, well, I do tend to get sent a lot of ace tankers because those tend to be good games, but he also got a high caliber, and we'll actually see his final damage count in just a second. So there we go, nearly 5,000 damage, 4,767, which got him 1,400 base XP, just under, and that was actually by far the best of his team in terms of damage, in terms of XP. So if you get the chance to use that DPM, then it's quite good, but on a lot of maps the lack of gun depression is really problematic, and I think that's probably the main thing that puts a lot of people off this line. It's the lackluster penetration and the terrible gun depression. So on the whole, that's probably why you don't see a lot of Object 263s rolling around the battlefield, because the grind to get there is probably a bit painful. And like I said, this entire line is just noticeably lacking totally in Russia compared to some of the other lines, like going up through the T-54, for instance, or going up through the heavy lines. So hopefully you've enjoyed this slice of Soviet action, this Soviet smorgasbord even. I just thought of that. Yeah, anyway. Yes, if you have, you can do the usual things. You can hit the like button, you can leave any comments below, you can sub if you aren't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.